The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, Roger Hickey of the Campaign for America's Future says resistance is not enough. Progressive Democrats need to offer real solutions. And Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal about Congress's inaction on guns. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Roger Hickey is a veteran activist for economic justice. He says it's not enough to be against Donald Trump's agenda. Progressive Democrats need to know what they stand for, and he has a plan to do that. And we say hello to Roger Hickey. He's co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. He recently drafted an 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. Roger Hickey, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Jim, I'm really glad to be here with your audience.
And we're happy to have you with us as well. As we get started here, in looking at this pledge outline, what really jumps out to me at the top is this phrase, resistance is not enough. Why?
Well, none of us wanted to be where we are right now. None of us wanted to, at least members of your organization and mine, did not want to be spending their lives resisting Donald Trump and his crazy policies and tweets and his takeover of the executive branch of the government. So it is absolutely necessary that we resist Trump and Trumpism, and increasingly he's been taken over by the mainstream of the right wing Republican Party. We need to resist Trump and what he stands for. But we also need to remember that this is a distraction. This is an interference with what we should be doing, which is rebuilding our country. Our country has been suffering from economic decline and all kinds of a rigged system for quite some time, even before Trump. And if we're going to resist Trump, we also have to be clear about what we stand for. What we would do if we were in power. What's the reason why people ought to vote for us beyond opposing Trump? And that's what, at least on the economic front, that's what this pledge is all about.
Mm-hmm. And we've heard that plenty of times too, where the Democratic messaging needs to, there needs to be a point to it. It's got to go beyond the resistance. And I think that's probably your point here of resistance is not enough. So why a pledge, Roger? I mean, how does this fit into an overall progressive economic strategy?
Well, to be honest, we geared this to the people who are already, knee deep in the resistance to Trump. Trump has kept us all very busy, whether your issue is jobs or immigration or getting the banks to work right or environmentalism. We're all trying to keep them from making things worse, and yet we thought it would be a good idea to get a group of people together who are all leaders of the resistance, who are also wanting to spend at least a portion of their time and energy and smarts advancing an agenda that is positive and gives us a direction to go in. So the idea of the pledge is that we will fight for good jobs, for sustainable prosperity and economic justice, and we will work to build a movement that can make that agenda a reality. We want to give people a chance to get together and say, all right, damn it, we got to stand for more than just resistance to Trump.
Mm-hmm. I want to point out, as we're moving on here, if folks want to kind of go along with us, because we're going to talk about this pledge and all the different and the 11 points of the pledge, campaignforamericasfuture.org is the website where you can check this out, and you can just read along with us, as a matter of fact, as we have our discussion. But before we do get into the content of the pledge, tell us first about the rollout. How many people have signed, and is it getting the attention you want?
About 5 of us put the pledge together, 6 of us, and then we went to about 70 of our people that we respect, and at least 70 or 80 people signed on to the initial group of backers, and that's a group that includes Robert Reich, economists like James Galbraith, black leaders like Rashad Robinson and Derek Asante, feminist leaders like Gloria Steinem, environmentalists like Bill McKibben and Annie Leonard. It's about 70 good, solid people who are all doing good work in their own area, plus leaders of the resistance movement groups like Move On, People's Action, Democracy for America, Our Revolution, Progressive Democrats. So we put together 70 people who said this pledge seems to make sense to us. And then in a few days after that, we went to a list that was much larger, and so far about 8,000 or 9,000 people have signed the pledge, and it's going to continue to grow. So we rolled it out to the media. We rolled it out to the larger activist community, and we're slowly getting press coverage, and eventually our goal is to be able to be as visible enough so that even people who voted for Trump are starting to see what our alternative is.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I mentioned, you drafted an 11-point economic plan. So how did you come up with the content?
Well, we can't claim to be original. This is all stuff that we and others have been working on for a long time. So it's pretty basic. But we resisted the temptation to be the laundry list group that includes every single liberal erogenous zone. We wanted to focus on economics. So the first platform for plank is jobs for all, rebuilding America. That takes money. Invest in a green economy. Likewise, we think that the only way we're going to meet those environmental goals to stop global warming is to really transform our energy economy, and we're going to have to invest public money. That leads you to making the wealthy and the corporations pay their fair share, which Trump's tax plan certainly took us in the wrong direction. Empower workers to reduce inequality. That means the right to a union on the job, and the right to demand higher wages. So it's a bread and butter economic platform, but we resisted the temptation to be realistic about what could pass today. Yes, we're for raising the minimum wage, and in lots of places that's happening. But we also think much more is needed in order to get wages back up.
Mm-hmm. Now, we'll see how time works with us here. There's a lot to talk about here. These 11 points, and you just mentioned the first few, and there's so many more. Guarantee women's economic equality, high-quality public education, pre-K to university, Medicare for all, shared economic security, make corporations and wealth pay their fair share. You mentioned something there. A global economic strategy for working people, close Wall Street's casino, rescue democracy from the special interests. Roger, it reads like a campaign speech, and those on the right would point to just say, Well, this is more government, more spending money we don't have, and on and on and on, the same sorts of arguments. So how do you get over that hump? How do you get people to really grab onto this and say, gosh, we can really do this?
Well, I think the only way to motivate people on the progressive side of the spectrum and on the more searching working class part of the spectrum is to be bold. I mean, you got to admit, Donald Trump was not a shrinking violet. He was up against a candidate Hillary Clinton, who would probably be a much better president, but she didn't talk about these issues. She talked about how bad Trump was,
right.
and Trump talked about big things. Some of the same things that we're talking about. It's just that he's now sold out to the establishment Republicans. So he was talking about a new trade policy, a global economic strategy for working people. He's in the process of pulling away from that. He was talking about a big, bold infrastructure plan. Why? Because he knew that made sense to people out in the heartland who can see our economy literally collapsing and the jobs disappearing. So we believe that we've got a better agenda, but it's got to be bold. It's got to be that the U.S. economy is in a fundamental crisis, and that people are turned off to half measures that seem like, well, this idea would get a few more people marginally out of poverty, when the whole system seems to be collapsing and rigged against the average working person. So that's the idea: is to be bold, is to get a real discussion going here, and test these ideas in the political marketplace as well.
We're speaking with Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. Recently, he and others drafted an 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. If you'd like to check it out, we're going over some of the 11 points of the pledge now. It's at campaignforamericasfuture.org. So taking a look at the first two, Roger: jobs for all created by rebuilding America, and invest in a green economy. These are two things. Number one, of course, the infrastructure. There, you're going to take care of a chunk of that. Investing in a green economy, the president, even during his campaign, was going the opposite direction on that, talking about rebuilding the coal industry. Number one seems like you could get everybody, that is Republicans and Democrats, around some sort of infrastructure, some sort of job-creating program. Investing in the green economy, I guess, is going to be some of the same old fights. So again, how are we going to really push the buttons of the people that count, and those are the people that go out and vote?
Well, I think that there is a pent-up demand for big action that would rebuild our society. You could see it in the Bernie Sanders for president campaign. If you go out to the voters and say to them, look, if millennials are going to have a future, we've got to solve this global warming problem, and you can't do it just by recycling. You've got to do it by major retooling of our economy. By the way, that creates lots and lots of jobs. It's like the space program for energy. We've done this kind of thing before, retooling our economy. When we built the interstate highway system, that was both an infrastructure plan. It was a relocation plan for people in the suburbs, and it put a lot of people to work. We've got to do the same kind of thing, only making the economy much more energy efficient and much more invested in technologies that are non-polluting. People understand that. Yes, Trump has sold out completely to the energy companies, but those energy companies are on the verge of they're like the tobacco companies used to be. They're feeling good now, but but we're going to make them keep most of their assets in the ground while we rebuild an alternative economy. Likewise, jobs for all through a new infrastructure. Trump ran on this, but then he capitulated to the Republican establishment that wanted tax cuts. And that tax cut that they just passed means that the infrastructure plan that Trump claims that he wants, which is way too small and way too privatized, doesn't have any money. And that we're willing to say that if we want a future for this country, if we want college education for all, we are going to have to tax the very wealthy and the corporations in order to have the resources to make those investments. That's a better investment in our future than tax cuts for the wealthy. So we're really taking on that debate, and we think that most Americans, and the polls bear us out here, most Americans understand that we can't cut taxes and pretend that that's going to produce prosperity. The wealthy are not investing here in the United States. So all of these various planks are related to each other, and we believe that we've got to take this common sense plan to the American people, and we think that if we get some politicians to start campaigning on it as well, we could certainly win back the Congress and the White House, and then we could really make these changes.
I'm going to jump around a little bit. 3, 4, and 5, as you mentioned, these are all interrelated in one way or another. It's it's the leg bone connected to the hip bone. Number 3 is empower workers to reduce inequality. Number 4, opportunity and justice for all, and number 5, guarantee women's economic equality. A lot has come to surface lately over the last year, especially when we talk about inequality for both minorities as well as women. And then, of course, opportunity and justice for all. I think that goes without saying. Again, big hills to climb. We've opened up and realized, gosh, you know what? We're not as equal. We're more racist than we realized, and things aren't as good as we thought. We have a lot of work to do. So how do we get other folks to recognize that these are still issues out there in the workforce?
Well, I think you see it almost every day in America these days. I've personally been inspired by the teachers in West Virginia, who literally every single school system in the state of Virginia went out on strike. The teachers there went out on strike, and they said to the public, "We are striking for our children and our students, and we're trying to make sure that every teacher is focused on their job and not their second job to keep to make ends meet." So that workers' power to say, "Damn it, it's important that we pay for things like quality education." That also has a huge impact on the question of women in the economy. A lot of those teachers are women. And it also means that if we make the investment in education, we're making the investment in every single racial group and ethnic makeup in those schools. So what we do believe is if we focus on raising the wages and the opportunities of workers, of women, of minorities who have been harmed by racism and sexism, if we raise people at the bottom, the whole economy will benefit because this is a consumer-driven economy. And it leads to solidarity. It leads to working-class people seeing other working-class people not as their enemy or their rivals, but as the people that they depend on for social services and prosperity in their community. So I don't think that's not enough to get a full employment economy. We've also got to do a major job creation. but we've got to do it in the context of justice for everybody.
We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Social Security measure. I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We'll continue our conversation with Roger Hickey on the pledge to fight for America's future in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Want good quality, lower cost health care for your family? And what the hell? Let's think big here. For every man, woman, and especially every child in our society? Here's how we can finally get Congress to pass such a program. Step 1. Take away every dime of the multi-million-dollar government subsidy that members of Congress get to cover their platinum-level health insurance. Let them have to live with the same exorbitantly expensive, dysfunctional, and, let's admit it, sick system of medical profiteering they thrust upon us. Eliminate all of their special treatments, including shutting down their Office of the Attending Physician, a little-known spot of pure 100% socialized medicine, conveniently located in our U.S. Capitol to provide government-paid doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and others who give immediate, on-the-spot attention to these special ones. Well, you might say, they still won't feel the pain because they're 1%ers, pulling down $174,000 each from us taxpayers, meaning they can afford to buy decent health insurance. But here comes step 2. Put all of our congressional goof-offs on pay-for-performance salaries. Why pay them a flat rate whether they produce or not? For example, American babies are 1/3 more likely to die in their first year of life than babies in Poland, which provides universal health insurance for all of its people. So every year that the U.S. Congress fails to provide health coverage for every American family, the members should get their pay docked by 1/3. Pay them only when they deliver for the people. This is Jim Hightower saying, when Congress finally assures good health care for all of us, then its members would get the same coverage. But until they deliver for the whole public, the public owes them absolutely nothing.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, part 2 of our conversation with Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. We're talking about the 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. You can check it out at campaignforamericasfuture.org. You can even read along with us as we have this discussion. Number 6, high-quality public education pre-K university. This is right out of the playbook of Bernie Sanders, and there was a lot of support for everything that he said, but right now, with this presidency, that's not likely to happen. So, how do we rekindle this move to really change the way our nation's education system is set up?
Well, I think this is the kind of demand that is so popular that it'll help us get rid of this government. Bernie reminded people in his campaign that universities used to be almost free. The University of California, back before Reagan, people could go to the university and you'd pay a small fee, but not anything like the tuitions that people are paying at public schools now. It's something that we have done in the past when we were less prosperous. And that idea, rather than loading people down with debt when they're just starting out their careers, and that's what's happening to way too many college students, we make a collective investment in the next generation, and we have faith that those people are then going to become much more productive and make a contribution to our whole society and our whole economy. So that's a very, very popular idea, and we think it's so obvious, given the massive debt that's sitting on students right now, that it'll be one of those kind of demands, like Medicare for all, that helps people get elected and helps us take back the government. But it's going to take a fight.
Number 7 calls for a strengthened social safety net. All right, it's Medicare for all and shared economic security. How do we do that? What does that look like?
Well, we've been fighting for years on the Democratic side to prevent just destruction of Social Security, which is one of the great products of the New Deal, and the Republicans have been attacking Medicare and Medicaid as well. So those are very, very popular programs. I can't believe that even Trump, who claimed that he was a supporter of those programs when he was running, is now capitulating to the Republican orthodoxy and saying, yeah, we're going to have to cut those programs. But beyond that, Americans are waking up to the fact that we're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a universal health care plan. And that would be not only better for all of our health, but it would also cost less. And again, Bernie Sanders put that out there. A lot of other people have stood up and said, yes, I'm with Bernie, including most of the other people who are planning to run for president next time around. So the idea of expanding Medicare and guaranteeing it for everybody who needs it would bring young, more healthy people into the Medicare system. It would cost money, but we would stop paying these very, very high premiums that we are now paying to the private insurance company. So it's inevitably going to be a mixture of public and private for a while, but we want to see Medicare expand, and we want to see more and more people covered by Medicare or a Medicare-like system, and that is very, very popular.
Well, I think it's important to point out, too, that, yes, it will cost money. A lot of these things will cost money, but those are investments. It's not just throwing frivolous money into a fan and seeing where it ends up, right? I mean, this is we're working towards a goal here with all of these 11 points.
Yes, and not only in the Medicare for all situation, you'd be trading, yes, you'd be paying higher taxes, just like you pay Social Security taxes. But when you need the health care, you're not paying the huge premiums that we're now paying to private insurance companies, and you cut out the insurance company's ability to manipulate our medical system. So yeah, it's an investment in a universal system, and you stop paying these huge premiums to the private companies. So it's a debate we need to have. We're putting our weight behind that debate, and we think it's going to be a focus of a lot of election campaigns.
In an article on the Alternate website, you wrote, "These progressive activists would be fighting for this economic agenda even if Hillary Clinton had been elected president." Does that say something about the state of Democratic politics?
Yes, although if Hillary had been elected, it would have been a lot easier to advance some of these things.
Sure.
I wish she had talked about these things more in her actual campaign, and I think she would be president today if she had. Thanks to Bernie, the Democratic platform was pretty progressive this past year. But yes, even when we win the presidency, that's just the beginning, and we've had to fight Bill Clinton and Barack Obama on some of these issues as well. A better chance of advancing the ball. There's a better chance of winning some of these things when the Democrats are in the majority and when we control the presidency. And I very much want to see Democrats win the next couple of elections. We've got to take the government back.
Absolutely. We're speaking with Roger Hickey, co-founder, co-director of the Campaign for America's Future, and the 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. You can check it out at campaignforamericasfuture.org. In that same article, you wrote about the corporate donor class and its grip on the Trump administration. Talk a little bit about the impact of that.
Well, Trump ran as a maverick. He stole a lot of our ideas when he ran for president, and as we know, he never used to be a Republican. But once in office, he has made his peace with the Republican donor class. He's his big accomplishment, which has not been good for the country. The tax cut for the very wealthy and the big corporations, that's been very popular with the wealthy and the big corporations. So he's capitulated. The people who voted for him and thought he was going to shake up the system, drain the swamp. He even talked about standing up to the big banks. That's all over. We now know where he stands. He ran as a populist, but he's governing as a tax cutter for the very wealthy, and you can see it in his policies in all the agencies, which are giving the deregulation for the major corporations to do what they want to do, even if it pollutes our communities and our nature. So I think one of the things that we need to do two things. We need to gin up the Democratic base, the young people, the minorities, the women, the people who are natural Democrats and who voted for Hillary Clinton. And we've also got to go out and talk to people who voted for Obama but then voted for Trump. And we've got to show them that Trump is not on their side. Trump is for the wealthy class of big money Republicans, and in order to do that, we've got to be genuine about our willingness to shake up the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, this leads us into the final four of the last four on the list of the. Number 8 is make corporations and wealthy pay for their fair share. Number 9 is a global economic strategy for working people. 10, close Wall Street's casino. We've been trying, but now they keep knocking that back. And rescue democracy from the special interest. A lot of emphasis right here on that block of people that have basically got their grip on the Trump administration with these last four.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the most exciting organizing is going on. Americans for Tax Fairness that oppose the tax breaks for the wealthy and the corporations is now going around the country talking about repealing that tax plan and getting us enough money to do the investments that we need. They are deregulating Wall Street once again, and they're passing legislation that is weakening the already way too weak controls on Wall Street that we put in there, so we wouldn't have to bail them out again. And of course, the special interests try in every way to control our election system and our democracy from top to bottom. And we want to support coalitions like the Democracy Initiative, who are working to roll back the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, and to protect people's right to vote, despite what the Republicans are trying to do to them. So yes, dealing with the money power that perverts our economy and perverts our democracy, that's a priority. Otherwise, we'll never be able to make major changes.
Well, and let's talk about the other side. There is a critique of the pledge, of course, that it will not win back the white working class voters that supported Trump. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, we didn't write this just for that. We think that this agenda will excite people who are the natural Democrats. I mean, we have a problem in the base of the Democratic Party that sometimes people don't see the Democratic Party working for them. And we desperately need more white women to vote Democratic. We desperately need African American and Hispanic voters to feel like the Democrats are really not just holding back the Trump forces and the people that are horrible, but also to produce a better economy and quality of life for them. That's what energizes people to get out to vote. So we did not write this just to win back the white working class. But I think the only way, working people should not be voting for Republicans. That means that the Democratic Party has got to do things that give working people of all colors real opportunity and a sense that we're taking control of our economic futures. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do an agenda that is good for working people, black, brown, white, and female and male, so that we can build a larger majority and that we can reliably make these changes and build upon popular support to do so.
And before we let you go, how do you want the general public to engage with the pledge? And let's tell them also where they can go to find it.
Go to our website right now, our future campaignforamericasfuture.org. We want people to have these discussions in communities all over the country. We want them to figure out who's running for office and which of these 12 points they can get their best Democratic politicians to embrace and fight for, confident that they are popular. We really want we want people to be able to talk about the future in big and bold ways. At the same time, we are working to resist the very worst things that Trump and the Republicans are doing. So we don't have all the answers. We hope that a great deal of grassroots popularity, a lot of grassroots experimentation will happen around this agenda. And we hope that several of the candidates who run for president next time around will be running on this kind of a platform.
Very good. Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. We've been talking about the 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. Again, you can go to campaignforamericasfuture.org if you would like to sign up. Do it right now. Roger, thank you so much for your time with us today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back and updating us on how things are going with the plan.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the conversation, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Roger. Take care.
Here.
This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
I am lucky enough to be joined by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from Washington State, the 7th District in Washington State. Congresswoman, thank you for...
It is always great to be here.
Thank you for coming in with the JV team today while Bill is out. You're stuck with me.
I've been with the JV team, and it's pretty darn good.
You have been with the JV team, but we're working on it. I appreciate you coming in. I want to first of all ask you about a story we were just talking about with Elena Schneider from Politico. Looks like, it's not official yet, but it looks like Connor Lamb is going to be the new congressman from Pennsylvania. One of the things we talked about with Elena is how Republicans are now trying to rewrite history a little bit and talk about how he's essentially a conservative. Is that what you're hearing from your colleagues?
Yeah, I was hearing that on the floor a lot last night from some of my colleagues who were trying to say, hey, thanks for electing a Republican for us. And I just started laughing because I guess you got to find some way to take a massive, massive loss, 20 points for Trump district that went for a Democrat, that hasn't gone for a Democrat in many cycles, a district where the Republicans poured millions of dollars in, had the president come out, had the vice president come out, had everybody they could imagine come out to stump for their guy, and their guy still lost.
Yeah.
And so I think, I laughed and I said, well, if Republicans want to run against their tax bill, then we'd welcome them into the party. If Republicans want to run against cutting Medicare and Social Security, then come on in. We've got room for you in the Democratic Party.
Well, it's so funny to me because, I do think that a conservative Democrat is probably an appropriate title for Connor Lamb. But at the end of the day, I'm more worried about the second part of that title. He's a Democrat, and he's for universal health care. He is against the tax cuts. He's for expanded background checks. He is big on unions, which I think really delivered. Which I think is
huge, and that's not always a conservative Democratic platform.
It's not. You're absolutely right. And I think if you want to point to one reason why he won, I think
because of that.
The union
No,
turnout.
Exactly. My husband actually grew up in that district.
Oh, interesting.
He's from that area.
Okay.
Worked in that area, grew up there, knows it very well, and was talking about the fact that, the fact that Connor Lamb embraced unions and unions embraced him. One part of that equation is not always true for a lot of conservative Democrats. And I think that was huge. And he was absolutely pro-union, pro-collective bargaining, pro-worker. And so that's how the economic message, that and the fact that the tax cuts delivered for the wealthiest and would lead to a cut in Social Security and Medicare. The majority of the voters in that district are elders. And so he really cottoned on to that. I think he talked about the fears around cutting Medicare, Social Security, and so much so that the Republicans had been running tax ads in that district, and a couple of weeks before the election, they pulled them because they were not effective. Yeah. So, and they tried to tarnish him with, he's not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, whatever. I think actually, obviously his stances on certain things are more conservative, but I actually think he's got a pretty good Democratic platform on I would say probably 2/3 of things.
Yeah. We've had this conversation before about Democrats who are personally pro-life, and Connor Lamb is personally pro-life, but you can't just stop there.
That's right.
He goes on to clarify and make very clear that he is absolutely for a woman's right to choose.
And that's all we're asking for.
Exactly.
That's really all we're asking for, because I've said this in the past. The Democratic Party is a big tent, but the right to choose, the right to make choices about your own body is a constitutional right. It's a moral issue for me, obviously, but it's also a constitutional right. And we're looking for candidates who can have different opinions about what they themselves personally believe, but are they going to uphold the Constitution? Are they going to support the fact that women really should have this agency? And I think he does.
So just to back up for a second on the union stuff, because when people hear, I think what a lot of progressives, which you are a dyed-in-the-wool progressive,
yes,
and we love you for it.
So.
Love it. When people hear conservative Democrat, I think a lot of progressives sort of, they get a little antsy because that could mean a lot of different things. But I think that it's okay to be a conservative Democrat if you can go into your district and you can sort of point to what you can do to make their lives better, right? And unions is one of those things. I'm reminded years ago, Elizabeth Warren made the best case for this I've ever heard. And she said, look, you want to go out and you want to make a ton of money? God love you. To quote Joe Biden.
Yeah.
God bless you. Go out and go make a ton of money. But you've got to recognize that if you created this product that made you a millionaire, we paid for the roads for your product to be delivered on. We paid for a police force that made sure that marauding bands didn't come and take your product from you. We collectively made sure that you got to this place. And I think that that's a strong message that Democrats running in redder areas have got to carry.
I think that's right. The other thing that, and we just did a poll, we'll be releasing the results publicly next week, but I'll give you a little sneak preview. We did a poll in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and one of the things that we looked at was, you know, voters feel like they've been left behind. I mean, that's really part of the big reason why Donald Trump won, is part of the reason Bernie Sanders was popular. And they want to see people who are taking bold steps to really standing up for them, rewriting the economy, and taking on corporations. And so one of the big arguments, pro-union arguments that I make a lot that people really resonate with is, look, it's great that there are corporations, but you do need a check on those corporations and workers organizing together. And you don't always have to call it collective bargaining because not everybody understands what that is.
Sure.
But workers coming together and being able to speak for themselves and talk about their own priorities is better than having a boss say to you, I'm going to give you these 3 things because I think these are the things you want the most, versus workers saying, hey, these are the 3 things that matter the most to us, and we want you to give them to us. And so that works a lot. But the other thing I'll say is this conservative Democrat, I don't know about all the labels. I'm a proud progressive, as you just said. But I don't think that the ideas that I fight for are progressive ideas. I think they are working families' ideas. And so our poll tested this. We looked at swing districts across the country. And what we found is that swing voters and progressive voters in swing districts, not in a blue district like mine, in swing districts, actually want the same thing. And they respond really well to many of the messages that Connor Lamb used.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they actually respond incredibly well to Medicare for all, universal health care, public option, all of those things.
Yes.
They respond very well to taking on corporations, taking on Wall Street, and you know, rewriting the rules of the economy. I mean, these are things that Connor Lamb said. Connor Lamb, by the way, did not take corporate PAC money.
Oh.
Did not take corporate PAC money, raised over $4 million, ran ads on the fact that he didn't take corporate PAC money. So, I mean, these are, I think it's very funny when Republicans say, you know, try to spin this as you elected a Republican, because if you look at his platform, he's actually, I think in many ways he's a progressive.
Sure.
In some ways he's conservative. I mean, his stance on you know, he is pro-life, as you said personally, but he supports a woman's right to choose. That's a progressive position in my mind, but it's also a mainstream position.
I can totally live with that.
Exactly.
I can totally live with that. That's not a problem for me. And you know, look, there was a period of time where, you know, a lot of pieces were being written and books being written about how Democrats have got to just give up on certain redder districts, right? And it's just like, no, it's so wrong. It's so wrong.
I was thinking about that because we didn't even field a candidate in that district for a couple of cycles. So naturally people went away to the Republican Party because who are they supposed to vote for? I remember earlier last year we were doing a whole series of town halls in Republican districts where the Republicans would refuse to do town halls. And so I went into my neighboring district and it did not make me very popular. But, you know, that I think that is really important. Like the Democratic Party needs to be everywhere that there are Democrats, which guess what, is the majority of states. And there's very few states where there aren't any Democrats
Right,
at all.
right.
So, we need to be there firing people up and letting people have an alternate vision for the future. Yeah.
Take that message, sell that message. I think that a lot of the things that people want to hear are the Democrats' language. A lot of them forgot how to speak it.
That's right. And sometimes I think the Democratic Party is, and I say this lovingly because I am doing everything I can to win back the majority in November for the Democrats.
Totally.
But sometimes we're just too cautious. We're not willing to take on the corporations and Wall Street because we're afraid of the money that goes, to our campaigns. I don't take any corporate PAC money, so I'm not worried about it. But I think that happens. And I think that sometimes people are like, oh, well, we don't want to rock the boat. We want to try and get the Republicans. Well, the reality is in the majority of districts, there's 30% of people you're never going to get.
Yeah.
So don't try to get them. Instead, energize your base and speak to the people who are in the middle, who want common sense solutions and are looking for you to speak to their interests.
We won't spend much time on this because I mentioned it earlier in the show, but yesterday, the largest rollback of banking regulation since the financial crisis went through, and 17 Democrats voted for this. Elizabeth Warren, rightfully so, was livid.
Yes, and she has a right to be because, look, this should not be a hard issue for us. There are some corrections that need to be made for credit unions and smaller banks, but this was not that.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't understand why, again, we're sometimes afraid, some Democrats are afraid to lean into the idea that we got to regulate Wall Street, that we got to check Wall Street, that we have to stand up for Main Street, that, we can't give unlimited power to these banks. We do need to regulate them.
Let's not forget Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was president. I mean, he went out after these banks.
That's right.
And he went out after them in a big, big way. So you can do this and still be a
That's right.
Still be a popular politician.
And if all you care about is the polling and the votes, this is an off the charts popular issue.
Yeah.
In swing districts, with swing voters, with independent voters, it helps people win if they take on the banks. But of course, it is the right thing to do. That little thing.
That too. I want to talk to you about how yesterday I tried to watch a ton of cable news because it's a lot.
Yeah.
But yesterday, I tuned in and I couldn't take my eyes off of it because they were talking about all of the different walkouts around the country. And it was just so nice to see. I have a 13-year-old. He walked out yesterday as well.
Training him well.
I know. I was so happy. I didn't push him. I was just like, you figured out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And he said, I think my friends and I we're gonna walk out. So they did. Very proud of him for doing it. But it brings us to this point where it's now been a month since the Parkland shooting. It's been a little over 5 years since Sandy Hook. We have seen multiple mass shootings since then, and there has been no real meaningful gun reform. I mean, even after Las Vegas, which happened in October, everybody agreed we got to get rid of bump stocks. Bump stocks are still alive and well. And gosh, that's depressing.
It is depressing. I mean, it's both right now because, we walked out of the Capitol yesterday in solidarity with the students, and there were thousands of them all over, and they were just so beautiful. I had tears in my eyes. I was walking by and talking to a bunch of them. It was amazing.
I can't imagine what it was like to be there.
Oh, it was just
so cool.
Fabulous. And then my staff in Seattle fanned out, and they went to, because all of the schools in Seattle were doing walkouts as well, and so they were at all these different. So I was seeing pictures coming in from my district as well, across the country, and actually across the world.
Yeah.
And I think that this is, it's just remarkable. These Parkland students have really taken the issue to a different level, and they've made it a national issue about kids' lives. I mean, there was a powerful speaker yesterday. He ended up on cable news. I don't know his name, but one of the Parkland kids who spoke at the rally, and he said, your right to carry assault rifles does not outweigh our right to live. And This is about life and death, literally about life and death. And these kids to have gone through the tragedy they went through, and then to take that anger and that frustration and sadness and grief and everything and turn it into this kind of action is just amazing. And so, and then on the depressing side, the fact that the Republicans have done nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing on this. And let's just be really clear about that, because that bill that they pushed through yesterday is great to give grants to schools for school safety, but that does not address the issue of the guns. And these kids are smart. They called that out yesterday. I mean, they said don't, and I've heard them before. They came to talk to caucus. A couple of them came to talk to our caucus. And, one of them said, don't hide behind things like mental illness. The only thing that is common in all of these incidents is the gun.
Yeah.
And so I think that, whether they're fighting the NRA. Let's just be clear about that. They're fighting the NRA. And whether or not the Republicans will actually stand up for kids' futures over the campaign contributions and the political lobby of the NRA.
It really is that simple.
It's that simple.
It really is that simple. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
There was a moment during the CNN town hall that they had shortly after the shooting that really just sort of flipped my mind around on this whole thing. And one of the students that was there, Cameron Kasky was his name, he stood toe-to-toe with Marco Rubio and looked him in the eye and said, will you vow that you will not take any more money from the NRA? And Rubio would not answer it.
He wouldn't answer it.
And he kept pushing him. The student kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him and would not take no for an answer and would not take his double speak for an answer. And it was sort of a moment for me where I realized, like, we're at a moment now where these kids, they don't look to these politicians as, untouchable or exalted or rock stars. Like, you work for us.
Yes.
And you know what? You got to be held accountable.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't be afraid of coming to talk to me, because guess what? I work for you.
Yeah.
Don't worry about coming to my office. Come to my office, because it's actually your office. It's paid for by the taxpayers. And I think that that's really important. But I think the other thing that I'm really impressed with these kids is they are now also making a bunch of connections. They're making the connections between what people say and what they do and how people vote. They are pulling voting into this in a big way. They're doing voter registration drives along with their walkouts. They are saying in their speeches, if you listen to this kid, they're saying in these speeches, if you don't do this, we are going to vote you out. But they're taking the action to make sure kids are registered, which is really important with young people. It's an issue that's fired up the voting desire within these young people. But here's the other connection. One of the Parkland kids are amazing, but there have been kids, black and brown kids, who have stood up against gun violence before.
Sure have.
And that has not percolated to the top in the same way. And so I've been cognizant of that. There are folks in communities of color that have been cognizant of that. And when I listened to the speeches yesterday, I found that all these kids are making the connection to communities of color and between mass shootings and shootings in communities across the country, particularly in black and brown communities across the country. And I was really struck by that, really moved by that they're starting to make those connections very quickly. This is not about just their school anymore. Right. It's not just about mass shootings. It is now about gun violence as a much bigger issue that affects a lot of communities of color across the country. So I'm inspired by them, and I think this is our future. Like they are leading us. And they are demanding change. And I don't know what happens if Republicans continue. I mean, even Donald Trump, he has a meeting with the NRA, and all of a sudden he backs off of his, bold statements that he made.
we were talking after that big meeting that Donald Trump had, where he came out and said some things that I haven't heard even the most progressive politicians say.
I gotta say.
On gun control. And look, It really is telling, though, that as soon as he did it, just about everybody goes, he's not going to stick with that.
Right.
He's not going to stick with that. And lo and behold, he
didn't. Yeah. And I tweeted right after the story came out that he's backed way off. I just tweeted a bunch of dollar signs, and I just said, I guess money wins over, money from the NRA wins over kids' lives.
Yeah. Yeah, we should mention, by the way, you are tweeting at Rep Jayapal on Twitter. Make sure you're following her there to get those tweets. We love those. Gosh, it feels like it was a year ago since Donald Trump fired Rex Tillerson, but that actually just happened this week.
That happened this
week. 2 days ago.
I know. I know.
That's
I tweeted about that too. I said Donald Trump doesn't know how to govern without chaos.
Right. Well, so I want to ask you about that. We've only got about 3 or 4 minutes left, but I just want to kick this around for the remainder of the time that you're here. The general chaos in the White House. And I understand and I can appreciate that the working in the White House is and probably should be a fairly high stress job in terms of you got a lot of pressure on you working in the White House. But the chaos of turnover, staff turnover, and confusion and miscommunication, at what point does that just become not able to work?
I mean, he uses some of it to his advantage.
Sure.
He's able to change the story from guns to Tillerson, from Stormy Daniels to, whatever. I mean, whatever it is he wants to change the situation from, the story from, he's got that. He runs the White House like a reality TV show.
Yeah,
I mean, people
he really
find
does.
out that they're fired, when they're speaking at a press conference and it comes up on the television screen. I mean, it's incredibly disrespectful, whether you like Tillerson or not, whether you like any of these guys or not. It's incredibly disrespectful. Yeah. But much worse than that, it's damaging to our reputation around the world. I mean, people have no idea and have essentially written the United States out as a reliable, strategic, thoughtful partner. That's not what we are anymore. We're a wild card. And people have used that word when I'm traveling overseas. They've said, the administration it's just a wild card. We have no idea. Now, sometimes maybe he gets certain things that nobody else would get because he's so unconventional.
Sure.
But then he goes into a situation like North Korea, where he's undermined Rex Tillerson on every level.
Oh, yeah.
Accepted that North Korea meeting without talking to his Secretary of State.
He can talk to anybody.
Yeah. In fact, dismissed Tillerson when Tillerson said they were looking for a diplomatic solution. He said, "Don't waste your time with Little Rocket Man."
Yeah.
Tweeted that at his Secretary of State.
Not that long ago.
So I think that, it's very dangerous for us as a country, particularly as he goes into some of these high stakes meetings. And I wasn't thrilled with Tillerson, but on some things, Tillerson pushed him around the Iran nuclear deal to stay in the Iran deal. He was looking for a diplomatic solution in North Korea. He was not a good manager, and he wasn't a good manager of Trump, and he also wasn't a good manager of State Department from people I've talked to. And now we've got Pompeo coming in, who essentially condones and doesn't think waterboarding is a form of torture. So there are big issues with his replacement too. But I think the biggest thing is Donald Trump is only can operate in chaos, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I love my Democratic friends who say, "Oh, he can't do this for much longer. He's got to be." No, I think this is where he lives.
No, I think he's very comfortable in this environment. And like I said, I don't think we should just say it's good for us. I mean,
no.
I think he uses these situations to his advantage much of the time, and I think it reinforces his reputation with the people who voted for him, that he's unconventional, that he, doesn't stand by what parties have always done, that he's an independent thinker. I think those are all true.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible, Roger Hickey and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.